Okay, so what I will do is I'm going to go to the command line and we're going to start a whole new app. So I'll kill the server that I had running before. I'm on the Windows Linux subsystem, so I'm just in my Mount C folder. I wouldn't recommend putting stuff right off of C drive, like that's sort of messy file system management. I'm just doing it there because if I don't, my prompt becomes really long because it puts the path in there, and then it makes it so like every time I type a Rails command, it always goes over the end. And so I'm only putting it just directly off C drive because I'm trying to keep my path short. I should probably just figure out why Commander or how Commander adds this part of my path in. That's all. This kind of stuff is editable inside of most shells, and then I could just remove that little username and machine prompt, and my path will be shorter again. But I haven't figured out how to do that yet. So, got my Rails app. I'm still running Rails. What version? We'll see. 5.2.1. It's usually good to ride as close to the edge of Rails as you can. So like every time you start a new Rails project, you just always make sure you have the latest version of Rails so that you don't get trapped only using older versions of Rails, which things change and you don't learn about those changes, and then you have to take on a bunch of change all at once if you've waited a long time. So I'll quickly go to the Ruby on Rails website and just see what is the latest version of Rails. Morning. Oh, we're good. It's still, the latest version is still the one that we're on, so it's 5.2.1. If I had wanted to update Rails, I could do that with the gem command. We're just starting a whole new Rails application from scratch. Rails, new. The new name of the app, this is going to be called Aqua. Because I'm a cuttlefish, get it? I don't know if it was that funny of a joke, but like when I say these things in my head, I laugh a lot. Inside, deep down inside. So there we are. It's doing its Rails thing. It's created all the files and folders for us. It's going to Ruby gems. It's pulling in the latest version. So you'll see lots of greens in the gem list, because it's also getting the latest versions of those gems. So even though Rails hasn't gone up in version number, some of the gems have gone up. And so Bundler takes care of getting the latest and greatest in case they're, Nokogiri is a XML parsing gem, and it often has security implications. And so you always want to be getting the latest version of Nokogiri, because I've noticed there's been lots of security patches issued for that specific gem. Nokogiri takes a while to install, so hopefully you don't have a system where it's going to sit and install Nokogiri for 3 hours. That sometimes happens. Ramade, didn't you have that happening at the beginning of the term? It was sitting there and like compiling forever. Yeah, so some machines sort of get hung up on gems that have native extensions, because to build those, it actually pulls down the C source code, because not all gems are written in Ruby. The ones that you want to be really performant are written in C. And so what it's doing behind the scenes here is it's compiling the C application from source code, and then there's Ruby bindings that bind to that. So maybe I didn't think this through 100%, because now we got to watch that happen. Meanwhile, maybe we could just plan out the app we want to build. I'm going to use some really, really modern modeling technology. It's a piece of software called Notepad. And this is where I'm going to put my ERD. And so I'm going to make a fish table. I wonder if Rails is going to pluralize fish to fishes incorrectly, because isn't the plural of fish fish? Yeah. Yeah. So we'll see. We'll see if Rails puts an S at the end of fish for us. Fishes. Fishes. Oh, is it both?
I believe both are.
Look at that. You learn a new thing about English every day. So let's see if what it does. nonetheless, I want a fish table, and it's going to have a name and maybe like a scientific name for said fish, and maybe a fish would have a weight in kilograms or something. That's enough for a few data types, yeah. Yes, I can. Thank you for asking. Maybe font. That's better. I really like, there's this font that I have on my machine called Hack. Where is that? That's what I always use for all my source code editors. EFG, Hack. Yeah, let's use Hack 20. Is that better? Nice. Eventually, what I'm gonna want, because I want to add images to this table, is I'm gonna want like an image column, but I also want to demonstrate how you go about adding columns that are missing, so to go review that process with migrations. So when I first make the fish table, I'm just going to, this is like the fish table, and also the, the fish model. And this might be fishes, we'll see. Might be like that. So that's what I want to make by way of my Rails generator, create that model. And then we sort of need a game plan. So I'll use the model generator to make fish model. Then I want to add ActiveAdmin gem. I won't bother doing any seeding in this example because I'll get data in by way of ActiveAdmin rather than by way of a seed script, and I think we've gone over seeding enough that we're comfortable with it. And so ActiveAdmin, and devise gems. Then we'll add a few fish to the system. Then we'll realize, oh, we want images in this project. We want to be able to associate a fish with a single image. And we can do that we'll do that in two ways, but either way, we'll need to add a column. So we'll add a image column to the fishes table. And then we'll use hard-coded file system images. So I'll start off, I'll just have a few images in the assets folder, and I can just path to those. That's a sort of a simple solution to images, but not an amazing solution. And so then we'll add Carrierwave, which is a file upload gem. And I wonder, sometimes ActiveAdmin knows about these file upload gems, and ActiveAdmin will detect Carrierwave, and then immediately inside of ActiveAdmin's create and edit forms for fish, there'll be like a little browse button that will allow us to pick the correct image from our file system that we want to upload. I'm pretty confident that that will work with Carrierwave, that it will just pick up the presence of Carrierwave and allow us to do that. Optionally at this point, we could have images resized. And so by that I mean that you might be building a website where you want to, in your design, sometimes have thumbnail images for the fish, and you want to sometimes have large images for the fish, and you don't want to have to do any of that manual resizing using like Photoshop or Paint or something like that. You want the tool to do that for you. Carrierwave supports that. I won't go into configuring it, but I'll sort of talk about how you would. The students that are on, I think either way, regardless if we're on Vagrant or if we're on the Windows Linux subsystem, we usually have to install some libraries. And these won't be Ruby libraries, these will be like system tools. And the one that we usually have to install is called ImageMagick, and it's what Ruby gems, specifically like Carrierwave, use for the resizing. So they don't implement that resizing themselves natively, they just make use of like this command line ImageMagick tool to do the resizing. And now I have to pause this video. We're back again, and everything has compiled, and I can go to my fish app. Oh, it was Aqua. My app was Aqua. Okay, so Aqua is going. I'm recording again. Good. So we go back to my plan here. So step one of my plan was to use the model generator to make a fish model, and then we will see the name of the table that it creates. So Rails generate model fish, where fish has a name, which is a string, and a scientific name, which is a string, and a weight, which is a decimal number. I've only ever used decimal here. I don't know if it actually, because all of these things aren't real data types, they just become something, it's a way of keeping the database like database agnostic. So I don't know. I've only ever used decimal. And then, automatically when I run this, I'll also get an ID and my created at and my updated at columns as well.
Are you going to teach us also how to put additional reference to the tables or something?
To do?
Like additional references to each table?
In what way? Like by way of like associations, or? I will, probably not in this demo though, but I can review that.
Okay.
My goal with this demo is mainly just to another project to install ActiveAdmin and then get images into the system. Seems like my machine is much slower than it normally is when running these generators, but nonetheless, here we are. It's fish, so it pluralized fish as fish. That's okay. And I will Rails DB migrate. Closing up other applications just in case they're like taking up my system resources. I don't know. There we are. I haven't been using Git, so I'll do so now for the first time. Initial commit of a Rails app. There is already a fish model ready to go. Oh, yeah, don't put exclamation marks inside of Git messages. Exclamation marks have special meaning inside of Bash, and so, yeah, that doesn't fly. Initial commit of a Rails app. There is already a fish model ready to go. And it didn't even get into my history, so I couldn't just do page up. That's better. I could run the Rails console. And this is usually what I do, like even when I know I'm bringing ActiveAdmin in, I want just a little tiny bit of data in my database, at least one record or maybe two inside of whatever tables that I'm working with. So I'll go into the console and I'm gonna create a few new fish. For each fish, I need a name, a scientific name, and a weight. Names of fish. Is that like a website? Yeah, Wikipedia is that website. The African glass catfish. That's a nice sounding fish. So I'll do fish.create, and the name is going to be the African glass catfish. And the scientific name is what? This thing here. and the weight is going to be 5.2 somethings. I don't know the units, doesn't matter. Oh, and that shouldn't really be a new, because I have no way of saving it afterwards, right? New will create the object, and because I haven't assigned it to any variable, I wouldn't be able to call .save on it. So that should be create. Sorry, it's still there. There it is, I'll highlight it for you. While you type it in, I'll try to pronounce this word. Pereutropus debaui. Yes?
Does it matter whether or not there's spaces after the colon?
It does not, but that's a great question. So you can have spaces, or you can actually ended up with both. So this is no space between the colon and the symbol name, and this one I put a space in, and this one I did as well. It doesn't matter. So that was good. That got me a single entry into my database, which is all I need for now. I just want one in there. And it is now ID 1 within the system. It's got its created at and updated at. The weight, notice whenever we use decimals, the weights are shown, or the values are shown in scientific notation form. So it's like this number times 10 to the power of this number. So it's like 10 to the power of the number on the right of the E. Okay, so that gives me a fish in my system. What's my next step here? I want to add ActiveAdmin and devise to my project. So I've done this one here. I'll move that to a done list. This will be a to-do list here. To do. Fish? Yeah.
Oh, fish, yeah. Fish is doesn't exist.
Well, I was wondering if it would make that or not, but I guess it didn't. So now we are wondering no longer. There we are. Okay, so ActiveAdmin, to add that, we do it by way of, I will go to VS Code, and I'm going to add a folder to my workspace, and it's the new folder that I'm working with. Yeah. Oh, very top. Oh, you're right, Aqua. And I need to open the gem file, and I need to add into the gem file the 2 gems that we want. And I usually add them right before we get into the group gems. Where you add them in this file does not actually matter, and the order in which you add gems also does not matter, even if there's dependencies involved. So I could have devise first before ActiveAdmin, or I could have it after ActiveAdmin. So this is our admin dashboard, and this is user auth. So there's the 2 types of auth, right? There's authentication and authorization. Devise tends to handle the authentication piece, username and passwords or tokens. It supports token-based API stuff as well. And then there's other gems like CanCan that allows for authorization. So if you wanted to add in roles to your users, you don't have to manage that yourself. The roles could be managed by something like CanCan, which adds authorization to authentication like devise. And once I have those in my gem file, I'm going to go to, I've got 2 tabs open here, so I'm going to just get to the, I got C Aqua. Bundle install is how I parse that gem file and have those gems added to my project. They'll now be in this list of available gems. The next step with ActiveAdmin is to run its generator. So it's added a Rails generator. So Rails G ActiveAdmin, active_admin install. And that's one that I have to consciously think about every time, because the gem is called ActiveAdmin, one word, but the generators are active_admin. And that, like we've seen in the past, it creates some migrations for the ActiveAdmin specific tables. It also adds a new admin folder and some style sheets as well. Show the gem file? Yes, I can. So the gem file, I added these two lines. I've got ActiveAdmin, all one word, and I've got devise, DEVISE. You got it, so I'll type it in here. Rails G active_admin : install. Good morning. Okay, it's now time to do a run of migrations. Rails DB migrate. That will generate the tables that ActiveAdmin needs to use, the ones that ActiveAdmin's generator, install generator, created migrations for. Git status shows me a bunch of untracked files and modified files. So I get add and I get commit, adding ActiveAdmin after running install generator. There's my commit message up here. One of the things I really like about being very explicit with my commit messages is sometimes I'll be away from a technology for a while and I'll work in another tech space, like maybe I'm away from Rails for a while and I'm working in the JavaScript world, and I'll come back and I'll forget all the little steps it takes to set up a Rails app, and I can just bring up an old project and look at the commit log, and there they are, every step I took to build the Rails app. And so I don't necessarily have the best memory in the world. I forget a lot of things very quickly, but that's almost a benefit in the tech community because things change so quickly that you sort of need some kind of process to take the garbage out every once in a while anyways. So being forgetful is great in the tech world, as long as you take good notes. Okay, so I've got that stuff committed. I have to run the seed script now. I run the seed script because ActiveAdmin put a username and password in there. So the last time you saw me make that username and password manually, I believe, using the console, or maybe not. I can't remember which way I did it last time. But nonetheless, if we looked at the DB folder and into the seed script, we'd see that we have this line that's going to create this default user for us, and I will just leave this as adminexample.com with the password of password. You would never want to, leave that probably into a Rails app, but it does have some protection for you. It'll only ever run that line if Rails is running in development mode. So if you accidentally run a seed script on a production server, it's not going to put that insecure user into the system for you. Rails DB seed. No S on the end of that one. And meanwhile, over in my other tab, while that's running, I can fire up the Rails server because it's now time that I can go and try to log into ActiveAdmin. And what I'm hoping to see when I log into ActiveAdmin is my one fish should already be in there, ready to be edited, and then I can have another, add other fish after I whitelist the fish table. That's looking good, it's running. This has run and didn't look like there was any errors because there was no output other than this warning that I always seem to get. And so that brings me to hopping over to Chrome and going to localhost 3000 and hoping to see the welcome on to Rails message, and also going to /admin. Going to /admin for the first time always takes a little bit of time because there's a bunch of assets that the asset pipeline are sort of crunching through. In a production app, it won't take this long because the asset pipeline caches all of that work. And now I can go in with my admin at example.com with my password of password, setting the remember me flag. And there we go. I'm in. I need to register my resource and whitelist its columns, and I will then be able to not only see the fish within the table or within the dashboard, but edit and create them. So that work happens inside of the app folder. In the admin folder, I'm going to generate files in there.
I have the same error like yesterday.
Oh, no. Okay, so the steps we need to go through now are registering our resource. So that is, again, an ActiveAdmin generator. Rails G ActiveAdmin resource. So again, active_admin : resource. And then the resource that we want to add is fish. Capital F-I-S-H. I'm not sure if the capital is required, but it might be. So Rails generate ActiveAdmin resource fish. ActiveAdmin is what's called a Rails engine. And so it's a little bit more than your regular everyday gem that is just a library. A Rails engine is a piece of a fully formed Rails app that you can plug into another Rails app. And it has things like generators and its own controllers, and it's a lot more powerful than your sort of run-of-the-mill library gem.
I have an existing doubt, which is we're going to be creating products to show.
Yeah.
Okay? If we are using this gem,
Yes.
like an admin gem, how to?
There should now be a fish.rb file in the AppAdmin folder. And it's into this file where I whitelist with permit params. The name, the scientific name, and the weight. The weight. If you've been developing on Vagrant, there's probably been a number of times where you probably needed to or should have restarted the server because we've done lots of changes to files that would not have been, detected by the server as having changed. And I'll just go see if this works, and then I'll come back to any files you still need to see. So there's fish. If I click on it, I see my one fish. I should be able to edit this fish now because I've whitelisted the 3 parameters. So I'll change it from 5.2 to 5.9. There we are, that worked. And I should also be able to add new fish. I can go back to my list of fish. The a-hole hole. That's the next fish in my system. And what's the scientific name for this thing? Coolia? Flagtails are a family of Coolia. Maybe that's it. Why won't you let me copy and paste that? Oh, here, the K, this there, I'll use this as a scientific name. It sounds very scientific. This fish, I don't want to even look to see how big this fish is. I will just pretend it's a giant fish. It's 534 of our unknown units. This is a really bad monitor, isn't it, for readability? Okay, I'm gonna click create fish now. Don't worry if you don't have the scientific name fully correct. I won't be marking for accurate scientific names today. It worked. We created a fish. And so, I mean, we haven't had to do that much work. We've probably been working for 30 minutes or so at this point, and we have a very functioning system, right? Building content management systems is where Rails shines. This is what Rails does really well and where it allows you to be super, super productive. So anytime I have a project that comes to me where I need a custom content management system, I'm like, hey, Rails. I just define the ERD, I make my tables, I plug in ActiveAdmin, and I'm effectively done, right? And then I do a little bit of work on the front end, maybe with some Bootstrap, and a lot of websites can be built that quickly, which is great. So it's good to know where a particular framework shines, and Rails shines in terms of CRUD apps, I feel. So, okay, what was next on our list of things to do? Oh yeah, it's like got to this point where it's like, oh, wouldn't it be nice if I had an image for a fish? And so that brings to mind two things. One, I'm gonna need some kind of front-end controller to start showing fish, and two, I then wanna plug in some images for these fish. So I'm going to add to my to-do list here. I can remove these things as being done. And then create a fish controller with a index and show action. Fill in the index and show views. Okay, that sounds reasonable. So controllers we generate from our command line. Rails generate controller.
Now you're starting to answer one question that I had.
Okay. What question was that?
Yeah, we have to create because I was thinking, yeah, we have the admin, we have everything, but then we have to create the controllers for the product.
For the other side, for the user side.
Yeah,
Yes.
I can do that, but I'm still not sure how am I going to style that.
Yeah, so it starts with a controller. That controller will have associated views, and that controller will also have an associated layout. And again, that's where it's nice to have ActiveAdmin as a separate engine, because it has its own layout, right? So that again doesn't couple us to it.
Like it's going to be fine if we actually just leave the admin.
Yeah, you just leave it alone. You got it.
Man, I'm so happy.
I'm going to add index and show to this. This will create views for me and a view folder for me. It'll create routes that I don't want, and I'll delete those routes. I never keep the routes around that controller generator builds for me, but I just like the idea that it makes those two files for me, in the view fish folder. So I'm committing, I've added a fish controller with an index and a show action. Now I can go edit the controller to load up the appropriate data. So in the index action, I'm going to load all fish. That's my collection action. In the show action, I'm going to load a single fish. That's my member action. And I'm only going to use these two because that's often all we need on the front end, right? We often, if we're just building a content management system that's from the front end effectively read-only, then all you need is an index and show typically. show the collection, show the member. I will.
I'm so really impressed of your race.
It's a very complete system. It's a lot of complexity to absorb. Once you learn the Rails way of doing things, the efficiency you gain is staggering at times.
I think I get it. It's just it's the user requests the view, so you get the router. So you go over the controller. If you need to something from the database, get over the model communicates with the database, return.
Exactly.
That sucks.
Yeah, I mean, it is what it is. So here we go. I've got my devise routes in here. I took out, notice I just deleted the two routes that the generator put in there for me because they don't use RESTful resources. So I'm going to use a resources command for my fish controller, and I only need a index action and a show action. And so if I didn't put the only on there, I'd get all 7 RESTful routes, including like the full suite of CRUD stuff, but then I'd have to implement all of those actions in my controller. Here I just want read-only actions of index and show. Now I'm going to want to open up my fish controller and its associated views. So I haven't been using the fuzzy finder for a while. I can sort of remember if you've forgotten about that, that's this ability to hit Control P and then start typing out a portion of a file path. And so I'd be like, oh, I want the controller fish file. So I can say control fish and it finds it, and I hit enter and it's available to me. So index is collection action for all fish. It's a member action for a specific fish by ID. You didn't even, I didn't need to, and you didn't need to even go into the routing file and set that up like we did earlier, where we set up like a placeholder in the route for an ID by using those RESTful resources that gets created for us. So this show action is automatically going to be run when a GET request comes in to the router to /fish/some number. And this collection will automatically be run when a GET action comes in to /fish on its own, where this last trailing slash is optional. And I could also go into the routing file and set up a root route, because I might just want this index to just display when you have no path at all, getting rid of that welcome to Rails message. So I could also make it so a get action, just a plain old slash, would run this as well. So that's another nice thing about routers, is that you can have multiple paths route to the same content. You don't want to abuse that, again, because search engine optimization, Google will start to punish you if it sees that you have sort of padded out lots of different pages that have the exact same content on them. It's wise to that. That's sort of a form of keyword stuffing that no longer tricks the Google bot. And so route to fish index. That's setting up my root route to go to that fish index. And truthfully, you might want to make it so that's the only way to get to that index action. You could make it so that you just go to show like that. That gets a little bit hard on the configuration front, because Rails always does sort of assume that you've got an index, and so I won't go there for right now, but it's a possibility. And now what are we doing here? Well, inside of our controllers, we want to grab the data that is required by the views that are going to automatically load when the action finishes executing. So at the end of the index action, it's going to magically share @vars with app views fish index.html.erb. And after this one fires off, it'll auto magically share @vars with app views fish show.html.erb. We can circumvent that. We can either redirect at the end of an action, or we can render the view that belongs to a different action if that's applicable. But the default is that it goes and finds a view with a matching name, and instance variables are shared with it. This is one place where Rails goes completely against object-oriented conventions. @vars are normally private things that are encapsulated inside of objects, and Rails just breaks that OO convention and decides to share these magically with the associated views. Yeah?
So it'll pass to whatever view you render at the end of the method.
You got it. So any view that's rendered at the end of the method automatically gets access to any instance variables that were defined inside of that action.
Can you run anything after a render, or is it similar to render?
I imagine you can run things at the end of, like after a render, but you typically wouldn't. If you needed something to run, there's ways of hooking in like before and after hooks into the lifecycle. So if you really wanted to get deep into sort of circumventing the regular Rails lifecycle, you would use those hooks to do that. So, yeah.
What if you have two renders?
What if you have two renders? My guess is that only the first one would work. But I don't know what would happen. And we can play around with that. I'll try it after we get this going. I'll double render index. Or I'll render index and show or something along those lines. This is going to get a little weird because looping through the fish collection, typically I would have, in Rails you almost always loop through a pluralized thing, and then you have your singularized term for the individual like entities, but because we're using the same word for singular and plural, I might just make this like fish collection so that I can loop through and have individual fish members of that fish collection. And I'll do a fish dot, and then I'll order by name, and I'll get all of them. The all is optional here. Anytime you chain at least one request onto active record, it'll just assume all. So I can just simplify that to that. And then for the show, well, we're getting an ID from the placeholder in the route. And so we're going to get an individual fish here by going and finding, using the params hash, which is where get parameters and post parameters end up, and getting the ID, which is the placeholder. The router put it in there. So the router stuffs into the params hash, the get params and the post params. So it's probably now time for a commit. Add git commit -m. Implemented the index and show fish controller actions. You often see me write well-structured and well-written commit messages, but I'm almost always not doing them the way that I would if I was writing a production app. In class, I tend to write what I did. In a production app, I will often also include or only include what the intent was, why I did what I did. Because if you're coming back to someone else's commit log in, say, like a company kind of idea, you can look at the diff and you'll know by way of the diff what changed, but you won't know why the heck that other programmer changed that thing. There's always context, and it's very easy to blame other programmers. You come onto a project and you're like, who wrote this thing? It's awful. But it's just a series of decisions that were made due to constraints. And if you're not telling that story in your commit messages, like the why behind your choices, then you're doing a disservice to yourself and your coworkers. You want the why in there, not just the what. The what is discoverable by way of the diffs already. So I don't do that in class because I find that's actually difficult to do. So I would, if I was working in a production environment, I might pause a moment, I might run git diff and see what changed, and I'd sort of make that story in my head of like, why did this change need to be made? And so I don't pause to do that in class, but I thought it would be good to mention that. Okay, let's go to the associated views. So I can use Control P again to go to the views folder and find the index. So I can just like view in is probably enough to get me there. You have to be careful if you have multiple projects loaded up inside of VS Code like I do, that it'll fuzzy find inside of all of these folders, but it favors the active project before it looks through the others. Aqualand. That's what we're building. An aquarium for the ages. That'll be the tagline for this project. I don't know how to spell aquarium though, so I won't put that in there right now. Okay. I'm going to go and loop through the fish. Or the fish collection, I called it. Fish collection dot each do fish. And I get an end. And then I'm going to make like a div with a class of fish. And then inside of there, I'm going to put in like a paragraph tag. No, I'm not. Yes, I am. And then I'm going to put a strong tag inside of that. And then I'll say like name. And I'll close the strong tag. Scientific name. Weight. I started to use like the B tag instead of the strong tag. They seem to be the same thing. Like, can I just use B instead of strong for bolding things? Is that just like, so like why am I always typing strong? It just seems like so much more to type. Let's get rid of it. B. Okay. Now I need to take the fish and get its name. Oh, that needs to be an echo. Fish.scientific name. And fish.weight. And that is my fishy loop. That should drop down a fish class for each of the fish in the collection, and spell out their names, scientific names, and weights. Give me a moment, I'll try this out, and then I'll come back to the code. I just want to make sure there's no errors in there. Name, scientific name, weight. Why is it all going across one line? Oh yeah, that's fine. I guess I could put like each one of these inside of a paragraph tag. Like BRs?
Yeah.
I do that. I always feel guilty when I do that. And I do it all the time, and then I feel guilty all the time.
For some reason it's not.
The reason I feel guilty about BRs is like that's like styling that's in the markup, where I have like this gut feel like that all styling rules should always be present in the CSS, but I always break that rule, so it's like I'm always disappointing myself. This is like a therapy session for me as well as a coding session for you. So I agree. I agree. And as I say, I break that rule all the time, so it is what it is. So there's my two fish. You should see the source code, like the markup behind like winnipegelection.ca. Because I didn't create that markup, it's it's messy, Joel, right? There's a lot in there. And so I just put BRs in there everywhere. Any way I want to put things around, I'm pushing things around with BRs. So.
That was him.
Well, I mean, that's the project in and of itself, right?
All right.
Yeah, that's not Joel, and nor is it any of the other students. It's just like a really large application where there's no CSS framework, right? There's no Bootstrap, keeping it somewhat minimal. So yeah, I push things around with BRs there all the time.
Even after the design students made it pretty.
Even after, yeah, because sometimes I need to tweak something, and like I don't go into the CSS because there's a lot of it and I don't understand it. So
That's fair.
yeah. Okay, so there's index. Here is me opening up the view for the show. And here's where like a little bit of repetition is coming in, right? I can grab like all of this code from the index and I can like put it into here. And I can say, okay, that's like a fish. The only difference is that I can put like an @ sign in front of fish. Because in the fish controller, I'm getting an individual fish calling it @, and so in the show controller, I can use the same markup to display that. But now I have a little bit of repetition in my code, right? I have this markup that represents how a fish should be displayed on my site, and I have this markup that shows how a fish should be displayed on my site. Oh, and there's a bit of an error inside of it. There's an extra P tag in there. Oh, I've just like done the wrong thing. There you are.
Instead of using p tag for each of them, you can just use pre just at in between, yeah, there.
For
And remove all the p's in between.
and then do what?
It will insert the line breaks for each of them.
It will.
Yeah.
Like if I just take the P's out completely?
Yeah, just be pre.
Pre.
Yeah.
Oh, I see. I would use pre, but the one thing is that most browsers, when you use pre, then it defaults to like a monospace font. So,
Great idea.
yeah, so that is definitely a case where pre's will preserve the line breaks, but I tend to only use pre for like putting source code on the page or putting things that I want to be in that kind of monospace font. But yeah, thanks. I like that trick with pre's, definitely. I'll leave it like this for now, and I will fix this one up as well. Close that paragraph, close that paragraph, close that paragraph and open it. What do I need to do? Oh, you're right. Thank you so much. There. That's happening here. It is. Okay. So now I can go test that out. I can go to like /fish1, and I should see my African class fish, and I can go to fish2, and I can see the a-hole hole. And yes, the routes. So for routes, we have resources, fish, only, index, and show. And I also added the route. And then these are the two that have nearly identical stuff in them. I will make one other change. I will make it so that the name of the fish links to the fish's member page. So I'll say link to, and I will fish. Thank you. Yeah, let's put it here. I'll put it in both. It's a bit awkward when it's in the show, but that's okay. Index will not have @ signs because we're looping. So if I go to the index, I can now click into a particular fish, and that's done by way of this link to. So I'm linking to, first argument is what the user will see for the link text. The second argument is which object we wish to link to, and link to knows how to link to the right thing only because we've used the RESTful routing that resources offers. So the more you use of Rails' conventions, the more conventions become available to you. If I tried to do my own routing, I wouldn't necessarily get the same ease of linking. And so by using the resources for fish, then link2 knows how to link to a fish when given a fish object. And I'm now going to git add, git commit, implemented the show and index fish views. Okay. If I go to my to-do list, I can take some of those to-dos and make them to-dones. And I really want to get to that image thing, but I want to do one more thing before I get to images, is that as a Rails programmer, I am conditioned to look for markup and code where a concept is stored more than once. So I'm not averse to some repetition in code. I think, you have a little bit of repeated code that's slightly different in two places. That's totally fine. But there is something to be said where, I have what it means to be a fish on the website in two places. And so anytime I want to change or style what it is to be a fish, I'm going to have to change it in two places. And that doesn't seem like the most efficient thing to do. Like I add a column to the fish table, and I'm going to have to add something to the show view and something to the index view. So this is where we use this concept called a partial, which is sometimes in other frameworks just called a component. We're going to create what it is to be a fish in markup, and we're going to be able to use that component or partial in both of these separate views. So to do that, I need to go into the fish views folder and create a new file. So in VS Code at least, I can go to the Explorer, I can go to the fish folder, I can right click on it, and I can say new file. And the file I want to create is called _fish.html.erb. The underscore is a convention that Rails uses to denote files that aren't views themselves, but are these partial components. And now that I have that file, I can take this code, which is in my index page, and I can copy it out of there. Oops, I pasted. I can copy it out of here. And paste it into here. And now I will dedent it so it's not indented anymore. And this is my fish component. Inside of this fish component, I can use a fish variable, and Rails will automatically make fish data available to me when I render this component. So the variable I use inside of here to represent a fish object has to be the same name as the partial, which also has to be the same name as the model. So again, this is a real convention that Rails uses that gives you more magic when using this partial. So it's in the fish view folder, it's named after the fish model, and it includes a fish variable. When I do all of those things, my views become incredibly simple and small. In the show action, I can just say, I'll put it down on the next line here. There. In the show action, I can just say render fish, I think. Let me try this out and I'll come back to it. And then over here, I should be able to say render fish collection. Let me just check that this works. If the magic's all linked up, it should just know how to render this, which partial to use. All of that should be linked in by naming convention. This might blow it up a little bit, the fact that this isn't called fish. We'll see. We'll see. Give me a moment. I want to make sure I haven't broken anything. And it works. Okay, so what was your question, Chris?
Can you come up the partial?
In the show?
The
The partial?
Yeah.
Yes. So the partial has the div, and inside of it, it references not at fish, but just fish.
So can you look to do that?
Yes, and so in the index, I say render, and I pass the collection that I wish to render. And what Rails does here is it goes, oh, you have a collection. What type is it? Oh, the type of this thing is a collection of fish models. Is there a fish partial for that? And it looks in the views folder for fish and looks for an underscore fish file.
So you know that each collection is fish based on what objects are in it?
Yes. Yeah. So it actually introspects the the collection and goes, hey, there's fish in here, and then it goes and renders those fish.
So you automatically like.
It automatically loops for you. Yeah.
When you go into the show, they actually have like an error.
Oh, does the show error for you? So are you passing it at fish? And what is the error that you are seeing when you go to that page? Okay, so that is partials. This is the absolute most magical version of how you do a partial. You can do this more explicitly by saying things like render, partial, and then you give the name of the partial, and then you say the member is the fish. That's more explicit, and this is how you override the magic. So if your partial was called something else, or if the member was something different, and for this one, the less magical but still pretty magical version is render partial fish with a collection of fish collection. And so that's the magic version and the less magical version. Let me see if that actually works for both of them. We should see the thing twice.
But they will have like an accessory show page.
The show, 1 second, I've broken something in the show page. Undefined local variable fish. Do I have to do like an as fish? Okay, that I'll have to look into. I forget how to do the non-magic thing. Did you have a question or a comment or?
I was just gonna ask, like,
How do you have multiple partials?
but it would be the second where you can define. what-
Exactly. Yeah. So I'll look into this because I can't remember how the less magical version of the thing works. Did my index work or not? The index is good, so I'm just missing something about this thing here. And I'm sure this would be like a quick, like going to the Rails docs away, but we won't, I'll do that research on my own time. So I will just put this behind. I'll leave this in here. I'll comment it out. A word about this, like you can put HTML comments into your ERB views, but the render statement will still actually trigger and run. And so you'll end up with those fish commented out in your source code were you to view source. So it's not the best practice, but for here, I just want to keep that in there to show that this is the long version, the long form version of render for a collection. But that'll actually end up in the HTML. Git add, git commit, created a fish partial. Does anyone need to see any of the code or any of the source files? Okay, so I've added my my partial. Added a fish partial to keep the views dry. Dry as an acronym, don't repeat yourself. That's sort of like one of the conventions in the Ruby and Rails community. And again, it does not mean no repetition in your code. Don't get obsessed with that. That tends to lead to dangerous places. You sort of overly abstract code and then you fight with your abstraction that sort of matches every case. So I'm fine with a little bit of repetition, but if you have the exact same concept in two places, that's where you want to worry about being dry. Okay, we still got time. We've got like 20 minutes. Can we do it? This is the sprint. This is the sprint at the end of the project. We're going to get an image in here with Carrierwave. I won't bother doing the hard-coded images, but I'll talk about how that would be done if we needed to do it. We need an image column. This is the thing that we need now in our table. So we're going to do Rails, generate, and here we're going to generate a migration. And we could generate a migration and give it a name, and we could go write that migration ourselves. Or if we lean on Rails conventions once again, if we name the migration in a very specific way, Rails will just write the migration for us. So the way that we do it is we say like add the column to the table, and then we mention like the column by name and its data type. And so I'm going to replace those X's and Y's in a moment, but this is sort of the generic way that we add these things in a migration. So we'd say add X to Y where X is a string or X is whatever it needs to be. So in our case, it's add image to fish where image is a string. And hopefully Rails' magic will kick in. It'll see this pattern of add this to that. Maybe it's a capital T. That's probably better. So it's Rails generate migration, add image to fish, all in camel case with the first A also capitalized, and then mentioning the image, the fact that it's a string.
Can you have like an image data type in Rails?
No, there's no image data type. It's always with the gems that I've used typically in the past, either a single column or a series of columns that we add to our database. We're going to be using this thing called Carrierwave, and so it expects a single string. So there's no native support for an image data type in Rails, but that would be a cool thing. I would like that. Okay, so I'll hit enter here and I'll see if it writes the migration correctly for us. It'll go into the db migrate folder. Let me check that out. db migrate, there is a migration. And it's picked up that bit of convention. So it knows to add a column to the fish table where the column's name is image and the data type is string. But notice that, you know, it would have been a very easy migration to also write myself, right? So if you don't know the conventions of Rails, you could have just said like Rails generate migration and given it a name, and it would have generated an empty change method for you, and you could have filled this out by looking at the docs. So this is one of those cases where knowing the convention saves you maybe 30 seconds of typing, but it's still fun to know. And now I need to run this migration. And I'll need to go additionally to the ActiveAdmin folder where I have that fish file, and I'll have to flag this new column as being a permitted parameter. So that's not bad. Now when I go to ActiveAdmin, I should see that in my ActiveAdmin CRUD for any given fish. There's the image column now showing up in the collection view, and if I click through here, there's an image column here as well. What I'll do for this, at least initially, is I will Do you have a picture of this fish here?
Yeah, hold up, I have a picture.
There's a fish of that one, a picture of that one?
Yeah.
Okay. Nice. So there's, I just got the URL of this fish picture. So I just did that by right-clicking on the fish picture and just saying like open in the new tab, and then I snagged the URL. And I'm just gonna put that right in there. And so initially, we'll just try out using images without Carrierwave just by hard coding in full URLs. There's that full URL. And now, this would have been one of those places where if I didn't have a partial, I would have to change the fish in 2 places. I would have to change it on the index and on the show, but now I don't need to. I can just go to that one file and it's ready for changes. So I can go to the fish partial, and at the bottom, maybe at the top here, I guess, that might be nice, inside of a paragraph, okay. I'm gonna use the Rails image tag to show the fish image. And I only want this to happen for fish that have an image. So I'm going to put a if fish.image.present around it. So present is just a nice little helper function. It's a predicate, meaning it's a method that ends in a question mark. It's going to return true or false if this has been set on the fish or not. If it's null, it won't be present. And if it's a blank string, it won't be present. So it covers off both of those cases. I'll come back to my code. I want to make sure that this is working. And there we are. There's a fish right here. There's another fish down here. And I want to change a little bit about how fish are displayed. I'm going to take these 3 lines and I'm going to put them up at the top, and I'm going to change this to like an H2 that just includes the name of the fish. So it'll be like the fish name as a header, then the image of the fish, then the scientific name, then the weight. There we are, and if I go to an individual page, I see that, and I see that. So I just rearranged a little bit of stuff there for the partial. It would also be nice if the show view had like some kind of backlink or some way to get back to the index page without there being the need for the user to hit the back button on their browser. That seems like poor form. So like after my render statement here, I could link to all fish, and that would go to the root path. So I can use this root path helper because I have a root route. So because I set up that root route in the router, it's a tongue twister perhaps. Once you got the root route in the router, you can use the root path for your link tos. And that means I should be able to click in and see an all fish button and go back to that. So that was added here in the show view. So that's the simplest way to get images into a project, just hard coding them in. It's not necessarily the best idea, but it is an idea for getting images into a system. Not all websites are happy about like deep linking like this, right? Yes, you're basically siphoning off bandwidth, right? We're using Wikipedia as a content delivery network here because we're like hot linking to their images. That's sort of frowned upon depending on the website you use. So like if it's a website like Unsplash, which is like a photographic site, I think they allow for hot linking. They even have an API for making their images discoverable for hot linking purposes. Yeah.
Can you display the index HTML?
Yes, I can. Still paused here. Oh no, I'm running again. Okay, fine. Index.html. Yes.
Well, that's fine.
Okay, the final thing we want to get in. We have 10 minutes to do so. Let's see if we can implement this. Maybe we can, maybe we can't. Was there a question or?
I'm getting there.
You're getting an error. I'll come and check it out. 1 second.
I'll just.
Okay, that's fair. Carrierwave is a gem. It's a gem that allows for file uploads, and it's up on GitHub. We need to add it to our gem file, just like we do for all other. So I'll go to Control P, and there's my gem file because I opened it recently. And I can say Carrierwave. And then I have to run a bundle install on that.
So it's Carrierwave.
Carrierwave, all one word, Carrierwave. This is a file upload gem. And if we look at Carrierwave here, it makes a new generator available to us, just like ActiveAdmin did. And so I can say Rails generate uploader avatar. That's if we wanted an avatar. We really just want an image. And so I can say like Rails generate uploader image. Avatar would be more like if we wanted a user avatar for a user table. And this makes a app uploaders folder into which there is now a image uploader Ruby file. It's been put in there. And I've already added the appropriate thing. So I already have an image column that Carrierwave can use. Yeah.
Was that a model?
No, it's not a model that I generated. It's just, I'll show you what the file looks like. It's in the app uploaders folder. So it's just a file into which we can put a bunch of configuration data for this upload process. And the only thing that's really crucial right now is that we're using the file system to store these files. Carrierwave supports other places, and so it's a place to configure Carrierwave.
It's like part of Carrierwave.
It's part of Carrierwave, exactly. And so Carrierwave uses this file as a way of configuring this particular uploader. And then I have to go into the fish model, in the app models folder. And I have to register this uploader with the, I'll just copy and paste this from here. Mount uploader is the command. The column that we have is called image, and the uploader that we have is called image uploader. And that's in the model. So in the app model fish.rb file, I link that uploader that was just created to the column in this particular table. And I'm just going to check Carrierwave here to see if I need to do anything else. Now when a image has a, to check if a file was saved to the model, use that. Okay, fair. When I want to use the image associated with this uploader, I have to go to the model dot, the column name dot URL. And so now within my partial, I'm going to say dot URL on the image here. I'm a little worried about what's currently in that image column, right? I put that hard-coded thing in there that might mess Carrierwave up a little bit. Let's just go see what happens if I go to /admin here. Didn't like image uploader as a thing. That's in my uploaders file. Image uploader. I wonder if this is one of the few cases where I have to restart my server. Let me see.
Yeah, now the goofy image disappeared.
It disappeared. Okay. Okay, so I'm restarting my server here.
It's like they changed the image string that was saved.
It'll end up like that image string that's in there right now might break a thing or two. We'll see.
Now, add a slash and the header.
Okay, let me just see here.
Seems to be a difference.
Let me add it. Notice now we have a file picker. So it has properly detected this, and if I go to my pictures folder and I pick this image right here of the ghost emoji, let's see if I can overwrite that image for this fish. Ghost emoji, update fish. There it is. If I go to my front end of my Rails application, I've got uploads working. Woohoo! With 3 minutes to spare. And so that's Carrierwave. And so that was the final bit of what I wanted to cover today, which was implementing Carrierwave. I now have one final git add to make. Git commit -m implemented file uploads with Carrierwave. The one thing that I haven't shown is that resizing capability. So if I went and added ImageMagick as a Linux dependency, like a command line program inside of Linux, then I would be able to go into this image uploaders config file. I could enable Carrierwave MiniMagick, meaning I'd also have to add the MiniMagick gem to my project. And from that point on, I could use scaling requests to scale the image to the sizes that I want it to be on upload. And it can scale to multiple sizes. So I could have it create 3 different size images for me on upload automatically. So that's all I got for you for today. That was taking a Rails application from 0 to hero in an hour and a half? I don't know. Yeah, hour and 20 minutes. So thanks for coming.
Very last part is